Bitter Hollow, Colorado. There are lies told to save face, but there are also lies that cost lives. Right now, Cole Ward is counting the days until his ruthless creditor seizes his entire ranch and vital mountain pass, plunging him into a blizzard with nothing. His only hope of saving his dying estate rests on the woman who just stepped out of the wagon. The woman he tricked into this harsh mountain region with a forged letter. But that hope shatters the moment he sees her silk umbrella and soft hands. She too has deceived him. The woman expected to take over the Western ranch is, in fact, a bankrupt Eastern lady who has never even lit a wood-burning stove. Two desperate swindlers bound under a leaky roof face a massive debt and the imminent threat of sub-zero temperatures. The horse-drawn carriage, still running, waited for her return to the civilized world, offering her one last chance to escape this deadly trap. But when the whip lashed through the air, the girl abandoned her only escape, rolled up her sleeves, and strode straight into the ash-covered kitchen. Before that strange silk umbrella appeared in Bitter Hollow, Cole Ward's nightmare began on a bitterly cold, late autumn afternoon. The wind from the mountain pass blew down like a knife, carrying the smell of frozen earth and the cruel first snow of the season. Cole was straining, using his cracked hands to pull a stray calf from a coil of rusty barbed wire, when Pierce Crow appeared. The creditor sat upright on his carved leather saddle, carrying no rifle, nor bothering to reach for his pistol holster. In this frontier region, men like Pierce understood well. Paperwork and debt were sharper than any knife. He tossed the crumpled promissory note onto the cold ground, detailing every bundle of hay, every bag of salt and flour Cole had bought on credit. Pierce's voice was calm, but colder than the mountain wind. If you don't pay before the snow melts, I will take control of that mountain pass. Ward Hollow Ranch is just a small, barren piece of land, but it's situated at a vital crossroads, the only place all the cattle in the valley must pass through to escape the cold. It wasn't just a threat of foreclosure. It was the deprivation of the very survival of his estate. As Pierce turned to leave, the mail cart pulled up, tossing a small envelope to Cole. The neat handwriting announced Elsie Grant was on her way. Cole looked around his dilapidated farm. The makeshift shed made of scrap planks, the hay storage half empty, and the cabin riddled with drafts. His throat tightened as he remembered the words he had carefully written to her. This is a comfortable and secure home. Tomorrow she would arrive, bringing with her the hope of a safe haven, unaware that the promise was merely a desperate declaration on paper. The following morning, the fog hadn't yet lifted when the long-distance carriage dropped off its passengers at the station. Elsie Grant stepped out, carrying a hat box, a suitcase full of books, and a folding umbrella that seemed completely out of place in this rugged limestone region. She was impeccably dressed and neatly groomed, the last vestiges of a glorious past in the East, before financial misfortunes had engulfed her family. Cole arrived to meet her in his old trailer. He had tried to shave and wear his best shirt, but his blood-stained hands and the pungent smell of cracked earth could not conceal the truth. On the bumpy ride toward the valley, Elsie clutched her suitcase, her eyes searching for something. "Which way is the town?" she asked, trying to hide her unease. Cole didn't look at her, only replying curtly, dryly, "We just left it." A heavy silence fell. Elsie gazed at the jagged mountains, the broken fence, and the gray, frozen ground. When the car stopped, the patched wooden floor, the crooked chimney, and the dilapidated wood-burning stove of the cabin appeared as a cruel reality striking her mind. Elsie stood rooted to the spot in the snow, staring straight at Cole, her voice trembling but clear. "In the letter, you called this a livable farm." Cole responded with a cold, indifferent look. Livable. In the years when God still had mercy on people. At that moment, Elsie realized she wasn't stepping into a peaceful home, but into a life-or-death gamble. But she couldn't turn back. Tonight, she would have to cook her first meal herself to prove at least one lie in her letter was true. On her first night in Bitter Hollow, the wind whistling through the gaps in the wooden floorboards sounded like mocking laughter echoing in Elsie's ears. She fumbled around the rusty, wood-burning stove, desperately trying to prove that the experience in managing a household in the letter wasn't a pathetic lie. The truth was, on the opulent East Coast, she had managed maids, meticulously kept accounts, but had never once lit a fire or kneaded a batch of dough. The result at the table was an undeniable disaster. The biscuits were burnt black on the outside, but soggy and undercooked on the inside. The beans were undercooked and rock hard, and the coffee was so bitter it could peel the floorboards. As Elsie set the dishes on the rough table, she realized a harsh truth. On this frontier, clumsiness not only brought shame, it consumed the precious food needed for survival. Cole sat opposite her. He didn't scold, sigh, or utter a single word of mockery. He silently chewed through the pile of uncooked biscuits, swallowed the burnt coffee, then stood up, carefully counting the remaining bags of flour in the corner of the kitchen. That very resigned silence was the sharpest knife that cut into Elsie's pride. That night, she stood on the wooden porch, letting the bone-chilling cold freeze her tears of regret. She didn't cry for the poor cabin. She cried for her own uselessness. But the West had no place for weak tears. Before dawn, Elsie reappeared in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, and stood before Cole with a resolute gaze piercing the night. "Teach me from the beginning, and please don't hold back." And so, Elsie's harshest survival course began, not with pages of poetry, but with the bleeding blisters on her hands. Cole taught her how to build a fire when the logs had absorbed the moisture from the frost. He taught her how to knead dough using the strength of her shoulders instead of just theory. How to milk a cow without startling it and knocking away the precious bucket. Elsie learned how to dry apples, salt meat, seal the gaps in the granary, and even how to read the breathing of a sick cow from its swaying posture. She constantly messed things up. She burned herself by accidentally touching the stove, spilled her morning milk, and set fire to her only cleaning cloth. But absolutely, this woman from the East never complained, nor did she ever blame the surrounding poverty. Cole watched from afar, silently observing how she gritted her teeth and endured. In his hardened eyes, a glimmer of respect began to emerge. She might not be the capable wife he had dreamed of in his letters, but she was one of the rare women who dared to face harsh reality without turning her back and running away. Old neighbor Jonah Bell, passing by one afternoon, watched Elsie awkwardly carrying the heavy bucket of milk and nodded slightly, saying to Cole, "A person who doesn't know how to do something can always learn, but someone too proud to learn will surely perish when winter comes." Elsie gradually discovered her purpose. Not to become a dignified farm lady, but to truly be a useful teammate. However, just as she began to feel she belonged in this kitchen, a dark secret surfaced from the bottom of the cupboard. While tidying up the food storage, Elsie's scratched hands accidentally touched a crumpled stack of papers hidden behind the last sack of flour. She opened them, and instantly the icy chill of Bitter Hollow pierced her chest. These weren't land deeds. They were death sentences in the form of debt ledgers. In the flickering light of the oil lamp, the numbers dancing on the crumpled pages seemed to suffocate Elsie.
These were the promissory notes, the mortgage agreements that Cole had kept hidden. Money for hay, salt, flour, barbed wire, and the ever-increasing interest.
But Elsie wasn't an illiterate girl from the frontier. Skills honed from her days managing the accounts for her father, a banker on the East Coast, suddenly resurfaced. Her eyes scanned each line, keenly uncovering a cruel truth. Pierce Crow wasn't simply selling overpriced goods. He was weaving a perfect web of debt with inflated shipping fees and absurdly high accrued interest designed to strangle Cole until he was exhausted. The wooden door suddenly burst open. Cole stood there, his shadow stretching long across the cold floorboards. His gaze fell on the stack of papers in Elsie's hand. The silence shattered. Cole snatched the ledger, veins bulging on his temples. For a man from the West, poverty wasn't the most humiliating thing. The most humiliating thing was to let the woman he'd brought home with a false promise witness his utter failure and helplessness.
"Don't touch what doesn't belong to you,"
Cole roared, his voice breaking with wounded pride. But Elsie didn't back down. She stood tall, staring intently into his bloodshot eyes, and declared firmly, "You're not angry because I read them. You're angry because now I know you're fighting alone in despair, and you're about to lose everything." That statement struck Cole right in the heart, stripping away his last shred of pride in the face of harsh reality. Because, according to Elsie's calculations, if this winter claimed 3 more cows, Ward Hollow Ranch would be wiped out forever. The next morning, old Jonah Bell stood on the porch, pointing toward the narrow, fog-shrouded gorge, revealing to Elsie the true value of this barren land. "Bitter Hollow Pass is more than just a road," he said softly. "Before the blizzard locks everything down, it's the only escape route to herd the livestock down to the warmer valley. Whoever controls this pass controls the lives of all the small farms around." Elsie was stunned to realize that Cole's 63 acres of barren land were, in fact, the golden key that Pierce Crow coveted. He wanted Cole to fall so he could seize control of the pass, thereby monopolizing the toll collection and strangling dozens of other families. From that moment, Elsie's goals completely changed. She wasn't just learning how to make a fire to be a dutiful wife. She had to stand up and protect this home. She smoothed out the old, crumpled delivery receipts she'd found at the bottom of the trunk, comparing them to Pierce's contract. Elsie devised a cold, hard survival strategy. Drastically cut rations, trading her eastern silks for nails and veterinary medicine. They had to keep the dairy herd alive at all costs, using the butter, milk, and spring calves as weapons to fight off the debt. Cole watched the woman steadfastly chopping away out on the rough table. For the first time in his life, he wasn't just teaching her how to survive on the farm. He was actually giving her the power to fight alongside him. But in the nearby town, an informant had whispered to Pierce Crow that the Eastern woman was rummaging through the books. The creditor smiled coldly, decided to saddle his horse, and head straight for Ward Hollow Ranch before the first blizzard blocked the way. The sound of horse hooves pounding on the frozen ground interrupted the hurried rhythm of the farm. Pierce Crow had arrived. He stepped through the creaky doorway, bringing with him the chill of the mountains and the pungent smell of authority. The creditor's cold gaze swept across the dilapidated kitchen, then settled on Cole with a half-smile. "Sell me the strip of land at the foot of the pass now, and I'll forgive half the debt," Pierce said leisurely, his voice sweet as bitter honey. Cole immediately refused, his gaze unwavering. But Pierce didn't care, for his real target today wasn't Cole. He turned to Elsie, whispering venomous words intended to break the will of the Eastern woman. "An educated lady shouldn't perish in this dilapidated mountain ravine," Pierce said, deliberately trying to rekindle the deception. "There's still one carriage ride back to town. You can certainly get away from this liar before the snowstorm hits." Silence fell. Cole held his breath, waiting for things to fall apart. But Elsie remained unfazed. She took a step forward, looked directly into the eyes of the border tyrant, and calmly asked, "So how do you explain the double-charged shipping fee from last month?" The smile on Pierce's lips vanished. He narrowed his eyes slightly. He hadn't expected this woman who didn't know how to cook to be able to see through the fraudulent figures in the debt ledger. From that moment, in Pierce's eyes, Elsie was no longer a weak psychological pawn, but a real threat. Before turning and walking out the door, Pierce left a statement colder than the howling wind. "Don't try to hold on to the pass. When the blizzard comes, it will choose its worthy master." Pierce's threat didn't break Elsie. It awakened the strongest survival instinct in her veins. She began to transform the dilapidated cabin into a veritable fortress to withstand the winter. Old newspapers and scraps of cloth were stuffed tightly into every crack in the wooden walls. Rations were meticulously recalculated down to the gram of flour. Firewood and animal feed were carefully sorted. And then, to Cole's astonished gaze, Elsie took scissors and decisively cut up the last expensive silk dress she had brought from the East Coast. She used those ornate scraps of fabric to line Cole's tattered gloves and seal the drafty window cracks. She was tearing apart a glorious past with her own hands to exchange it for warmth in a harsh present. Cole witnessed it all. Men of the West rarely knew how to express gratitude with flowery words. Instead, that night, amidst the deafening clang of hammers, he painstakingly used leftover pieces of wood to build her a bookshelf. The shelf was rickety, its rusty nails clearly visible, but it was the greatest gift Elsie had ever received. It was the only thing in Bitter Hollow that didn't serve for survival, but for appreciation. Elsie gently placed Keats's Book of Poems, the only memento she couldn't bear to leave behind, on that rough shelf. In the flickering firelight, as her gentle voice recited poetry, Cole sat silently, suddenly realizing that a home needed more than just warm firewood and salted meat. It needed something else to keep the human soul from turning to stone. But that brief moment of peace was quickly shattered the following morning when the mail truck dropped a postal-marked envelope from a distant post office onto the snow. It was a letter from St. Louis, carrying a comfortable tutoring job, a room with a warm fireplace, and a ticket to a permanent escape from the debt of this deadly valley. The letter from St. Louis lay neatly on the rough, white, and perfectly smooth wooden table, a stark contrast to the soot-covered kitchen. The carefully written words outlined a perfect escape for Elsie: a comfortable tutoring job, a room with a glowing fireplace, and a civilized society free from debt notices and biting cold. It wasn't just an invitation. It was the last lifeline thrown to a woman sinking into despair. Cole walked in unintentionally, his eyes glancing at the postmark and the glimpsed in the letter. The atmosphere became heavy. He didn't snatch the letter, nor did he utter a word of pleading. He suppressed the fear that was tearing at his heart,
simply throwing wood into the fire and saying in a low voice,
"I've lied to you enough, Elsie. I won't lie again that this place is easy to live in." Elsie clutched her dress tightly, her chest heaving with anger. She was angry at him for not even begging her to stay. And Cole was angry with himself too. He longed for her to stay more than anything in the world. But the pride and honor of a man from the West wouldn't allow him to let his poverty shackle her life.
While they were locked in a silent struggle, outside of town, Pierce Crow delivered his next fatal blow.
He splurged, buying up all the remaining hay in the area, driving the price to astronomical levels. He knew Cole had no money left. He wanted to break the stubborn man's knees this winter. But nature was even more cruel than Pierce Crow. That night, the wind suddenly changed direction, howling mournfully through the mountains. Old Jonah Bell knocked on the door, his long white beard and hair covered in ice and snow, his eyes fixed on the gray sky. "If any cattle remain on the mountain after tomorrow, they will never be able to come down. A blizzard is coming." Before dawn broke, Cole had saddled his horse. He had to herd the healthy cattle down into the lower valley before the snow and ice sealed the path. He needed someone to guard the pass, keep records, and help throw the ropes. But he planned to go alone with Jonah, as he thought Elsie would pack the luggage. But as Cole opened the stable door, Elsie was already there. Her notebook clutched under her arm, her hands clad in patched leather gloves made from scraps of old silk dresses. She said nothing, silently climbing onto the horse's back. The road back to St. Louis was behind her. The evacuation through Bitter Hollow Pass was a bloody battle. The wind howled, lashing against their faces, the road slippery with a thin, sharp layer of ice. Suddenly, a bull slipped, tumbling down the edge of a steep cliff, dragging along the loosely tied barbed wire. Without hesitation, Cole wrapped the end of the rope around his waist and lunged down the icy slope to pull the animal up. Above, Elsie and Jonah clung tightly to the other end of the rope. The weight of the man and the bull ripped the rough jute rope. Elsie's glove tore. Her skin chafed against the rope, drawing blood. But her teeth clenched, her hands absolutely refusing to loosen their grip even a millimeter. When the cow was safely pulled up, Elsie, with trembling, blood-stained hands, took a pencil and drew straight lines in her notebook. There were still enough cows to pay off the debt in the spring. Standing at the foot of the pass, Pierce Crow awaited like a vulture. He gave a fake smile and offered to buy the weak cows for a pittance as a helpful. Cole spat a mixture of blood and saliva onto the snow, flatly rejecting the offer. Then, along with Elsie, herded the cattle past the creditor. They had conquered the pass, but the price came as soon as they returned to the ranch. A fierce blizzard unexpectedly struck sooner than anticipated, and with a deafening crack, the north crossbeam of the barn roof began to split under the weight of the ice and snow. The blizzard descended upon Ward Hollow Ranch with the ruthless fury of nature, roaring as if to devour every living thing. Under the weight of the thick layers of ice, the north crossbeam of the barn roof let out a deafening crack and collapsed. Cole lunged into the rubble, bracing his shoulders against a beam threatening to crush the precious hay. The rotting wood snapped, sharp shards cutting a deep gash into his forearm. Blood gushed out, hot, then instantly froze in the biting cold. Old Jonah was too old to withstand the blizzard any longer. The hay was starting to soak. Cole's hand was badly injured, and Pierce Crow's debt hung over her like a guillotine blade. Inside the warm cabin, Elsie stood silently by the flickering firelight, a letter of invitation to be her governess from St. Louis clutching in her hand. If she kept this letter, when the storm subsided and the mountain pass reopened, she could easily hop into her carriage and leave this devastation behind. Elsie didn't throw the letter into the fire as a cheap, dramatic act. She carefully folded it, tucking it between the pages of Keats's poems on the rickety wooden shelf. She donned her worn coat, wrapped her scarf tightly around her neck, and resolutely pushed open the door, stepping into the swirling storm toward the barn. Seeing her appear amidst the rubble, Cole snapped, masking the pain from his wound. "You didn't have to be out here." Elsie stepped forward, picked up the wet hay, looked him straight in the eye, and replied clearly, "I know, and that's why I chose to stay." But nature wouldn't leave them alone. In the middle of the night, the best cow, their only hope of milking to pay off their debts in the spring, suddenly let out a heart-wrenching cry. It was in labor, and its calf was being born breech. That night, the temperature plummeted to 37 degrees below zero. The cold was so relentless that the breath that escaped their lips instantly turned into white ice crystals. Inside the cramped space of the manger, the life of the dairy cow and the livelihood of the entire farm hung by a thread. Cole needed both hands to reach inside and turn the calf, but one of his arms was badly torn. He needed someone to hold the lantern steady without a single tremor. Elsie stepped in, removed her cumbersome gloves, and used her bare hands to firmly grasp the cold metal handle of the lantern. She lifted it high. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, then 45 minutes passed. The cold gnawed at her joints. Elsie's hands lost all feeling, freezing like stone statues. The snowstorm howled through the gaps in the planks, lashing against her face, but her gaze remained unwavering, and the lantern absolutely did not budge. Cole gritted his teeth, enduring the pain from his tearing wound, and with the last ounce of strength of a Western man, he turned sharply. A wet, thudding sound echoed. The calf slipped out, lying trembling on the straw, but it was still breathing. Ward Hollow Ranch's milk and hope were saved. Cole collapsed, gasping for breath. He looked up at Elsie. Her face was pale, her hands still gripping the lamp handle, unable to let go because her muscles were completely numb. Cole gently set the lantern aside. He enveloped her icy hands with his rough hands. No sentimental words were spoken. Cole simply brought her hands to his mouth, slowly breathing warm air, patiently thawing the woman's stiff fingers. Watching the calf stagger to its feet, Elsie whispered, her voice hoarse with cold. "In the letter, you said Ward Hollow was a sturdy farm," Cole replied, his eyes fixed on her hands, which were regaining their color. "In the letter, you said you knew how to provide for a home." "Perhaps," Elsie smiled faintly, a weary but peaceful smile. "We only write about the people we aspire to be." Cole squeezed her hand gently, his deep, warm voice echoing through the snowstorm. "Then tonight, you wrote correctly." They had survived the coldest night of winter, but as the first weak rays of sunlight pierced through the thick snow, a dark shadow fell over the farmhouse. Pierce Crow had returned. He brought the promissory note, convinced that the previous night's blizzard had permanently wiped out Cole Ward's last vestiges of strength. Dawn broke, casting cold rays upon the thick snow that had just churned up Ward Hollow Ranch. The sound of Pierce Crow's horse's hooves pounding the thin ice shattered the silence. He had come to collect the remnants, convinced that the blizzard and poverty had completely broken Cole Ward's knees. But when Pierce dismounted, he saw not a dejected man. Cole stood imposingly before the cabin door, his injured arm carefully bandaged, his eyes sharp as daggers. And emerging from behind him was not a frail woman trembling as she gathered her belongings, but Elsie Grant. In her hand was a ledger of debts and a stack of old, crumpled delivery receipts. Pierce sneered, his words a death threat. "The snow has covered the pass. You have no cattle to sell, no hay. Sign the transfer papers, or tomorrow I'll have the sheriff come and take away the rest of your diseased cattle." But Elsie stepped forward, slamming the stack of delivery receipts down on the wooden crate on the porch. In the calm, clear, and cold voice of someone who had managed the books of an East Coast bank, she exposed the creditor's fraudulent figures. 2 shipping charges were inflated in October. The price of hay was arbitrarily tripled compared to the summer agreement. And a whole bunch of sacks of flour you charged Cole for that Cole never received. Elsie tapped her finger on the page. "You're not selling anything, Pierce. You're robbing me." Pierce's face darkened. He snarled, intending to dismiss the woman's arguments. But Cole stepped forward, blocking the way between Elsie and the creditor. Old Jonah Bell also emerged from the barn, becoming a living witness to the verbal agreements from the summer. Cole snarled, "We'll pay the full amount of our legitimate debt with frozen butter, milk, and spring calves. The best dairy cow gave birth last night, and it's still alive. If you don't agree, take this forged ledger to the county office and sue. Let's see how Colorado law handles forgery." Pierce Crow understood he had lost his advantage. He couldn't crush an illiterate man anymore, for Cole now had a sharp mind to protect him. The border tyrant grumbled, turned, and whipped his horse away. He wasn't completely destroyed, but this winter he couldn't take Ward Hollow Ranch. They had kept their home together. But as the sound of hooves faded, Elsie turned back into the cabin, her gaze settling on the rickety wooden shelf. There, the letter offering her a tutoring position from St. Louis lay untouched. The storm had passed. The mountain pass was about to reopen. The battle for survival was over, and now it was time for her to make her final choice. Spring 1887 arrived late, but finally the ice and snow surrendered, receding from Bitter Hollow Pass. Under the bright sunshine of the valley, the calf that had nearly frozen to death during the storm was now strong and healthy, frolicking along the newly patched wooden fence. Ward Hollow Ranch didn't become rich overnight. Its granary wasn't overflowing, but it stood firm, proud, and free. Inside the cabin, now bathed in warm light, Elsie stood before the rustic bookshelf Cole had built himself. She had never sent the letter accepting the job in St. Louis. The path back to safety was permanently closed to her. She gently folded the letter, placing it beside 2 other worn envelopes. The one Cole had lied about regarding a prosperous farm, and the one she had lied about regarding her ability to manage a household. Cole entered, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. He looked at the 3 envelopes carefully tucked inside the Keats poetry book and asked in a low voice, "Why did you keep those lies?" Elsie turned, a gentle smile on her face, her clear eyes reflecting the image of the gruff but honest man from the West before her. "To remember that sometimes people lie not because they have evil intentions," Elsie replied softly. "They're lying simply because they don't know how to admit they're afraid." Cole didn't reply. Men born from the soil and rocks of Colorado weren't accustomed to flowery speeches or kneeling marriage proposals. He simply walked silently to the corner of the room, picking up the old, soot-covered lantern, the lantern Elsie had clutched with her frozen hands throughout the coldest winter nights. Cole carefully hung it on the sturdiest iron hook in the house, then turned to look at her, his unwavering gaze a vow of lifelong commitment. Love in the West doesn't begin with perfection or sweet words. It begins with burnt cookies, with bleeding blisters, with a calf born upside down in -37 degrees. and with the moment two people who had once hidden themselves behind lies decide to stay and protect each other's truths. Thank you for stopping and listening to the story of lies that lit a home. In the West, love sometimes doesn't need grand promises, but simply someone steadfastly holding on to a lantern in the midst of a snowstorm. If Cole and Elsie's journey touches your heart, please subscribe to the channel so we can explore more heartwarming love and survival stories together. See you at the next mountain pass.